Hey, good morning, Good News family. Good to be with you coming on a Wednesday. I haven't done this in a while, but just got some things on my mind and heart that I thought I'd share with you this morning. Actually, it came out of yesterday. I had really a rich and kind of unusual and encouraging day yesterday. So a couple of things that have stuck with me that I wanted to share with you guys. And then I wanted to take just a moment to prepare us to meet with Jesus in our communion service on Sunday. We're gonna dedicate the morning to communion, as someone has said. We're gonna let the table preach. So we're gonna let communion be the focal point of our encounter with Christ. So I just wanted to prepare us for that. But yeah, yesterday I had just a really rich day, and started out. I had lunch with an old friend of mine, not just old in age, but someone that we've known for quite some time. Probably, I'd say over 40 years we've known this guy. So a dear friend, and at different stages of our life and our journey and our ministry, he's been kind of in and out of the places where we've been and the communities that we've ministered and shared life with. And he was actually part of the first church that I pastored over 40 years ago now, which is kind of hard to imagine. So I had lunch with him, and we kind of lost contact over the last several months, but haven't been in real close contact for a few years. So I had lunch with him yesterday, and it was a sweet and rich, some ways a little bit of a difficult time. But man, I just was so encouraged by the faithfulness of God in my friend's life. He's had a tough life. He's got multiple health issues, and is, someone who's on my prayer list, someone I'm praying for, just for God's healing grace and for the Lord and his shalom to cover my friend. But we had this kind of amazing time of rehearsing life as we've walked it, and going back and remembering some dear connections and friendships decades ago, tracing out the story of people that we've known who've remained faithful to the Lord and the way in which God has been faithful in their lives, and talked about friends and family and communities that we've been involved with and pastors that have influenced our lives. And I found myself kind of walking down memory lane, both in our conversation and just in my own thoughts, remembering back, taking me back to the places where God has faithfully met me and met Nancy and I. And this guy's been a part of our family as as our kids were growing up. So got to, I don't know, something about those reunions that sort of, bring up the faithfulness and the grace that God has poured out over our lives. So it was rich, and like I said, he's had a lot tougher life than I have, and yet he's faithful. He's clinging to the Lord. He's anchored in hope and not complaining, but just kind of living in the presence of what his story is. So I'm really encouraged by that. And then I went from there to get a haircut, and I've been going down further south, Peninsula. Found a little barbershop down there. I'm kind of particular about who touches my head. It's kind of a weird thing, but anyway, found this barber down there that I knew was a believer. Last time I got my haircut, we connected. But this time I went down there, and as I walked into the barber shop, he was sitting there in his barber chair waiting for somebody to come in. He was reading his Bible. And so we just kind of greeted one another, and he sat me down, and it was just a beautiful time. Him talking about the faithfulness of God that he's witnessed over this last challenging year, this pandemic year, and what God's been doing, protecting the flock, the people that he's been a part of in his community further down in San Jose. And then just, I don't know, as these conversations do, it's just sort of unfolded to talk about God's faithfulness. And he told me his story of how he came to Christ, and then I told him my story and was remembering back and almost kind of reliving and revisiting that moment when Jesus grabbed a hold of my life with his power and his grace and his mercy and his kindness. And I remember that flood of tears that came for me when I was driving up to San Francisco at night, pulled over to the side of the road and gave Jesus my life. And, as I was telling the story, I'm feeling it again. I'm almost getting tearful and remembering that God has been so immensely faithful and gracious over a wreck like me. And so we left, we embraced, he's been vaccinated, and we prayed together as I left. A rich day. I'm praying for more days like that, more days where my heart's eyes are awake to the faithfulness and the grace and the presence of Christ. So I hope you're having days like that. He's been faithful. He is faithful. And this Sunday, we're going to focus right there, focus on the faithfulness of God. I've asked a couple of people in our church to share where they've witnessed God's faithfulness over this last challenging year. I think that's going to be a great morning. But I also am remembering, and this is what I want to prepare us for Sunday, remembering that when we come to communion, we're coming really to almost the fourth quarter of God's redemptive plan. We're coming to the point in history where we're remembering God's final act of redemption through the giving of his Son that leads us to the coming of the kingdom. And while now we are in that kingdom period, we're waiting for the final consummation, the final victory, and the return of Christ. But we're in these last days, this last chapter, kind of reading the pages at the end of the book of God's faithfulness and grace. But when we come to communion, we're really experiencing and walking in the truth of God's faithfulness to his promise way back throughout the course of history, all the way back to his promise to Adam and Eve right after the fall, way back in Genesis. And so when we come to communion, we're celebrating this large, big narrative arc of the faithfulness and the grace of God, that God decided not to act in judgment against a sinful and broken humanity, but he chose instead a course of faithfulness where he would promise faithfulness and he would act faithfully according to his promise. And that shows up a number of places throughout the Bible. And one of the most important ones, just want to read it this morning, is found in Genesis chapter 12. Oh, I thought I marked it in my Bible. Yeah, there it is. So this is God's promise to Abraham. So the promise begins way back with Adam and Eve, and then we get the Tower of Babel, and we get Noah, and then we get the reestablishment of the repopulation of humanity on planet Earth, and then we get kind of a second wave of the fall where things are really broken, and then we get this moment in time, this moment in the history of God's faithfulness that he taps a guy named Abram on the shoulder and gives him this promise. This is Genesis 12, starting with verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all of the families of the earth shall be blessed." It's known as the Abrahamic covenant, or the promise made to Abraham. It includes the land, it includes the nation or the people of Israel, but it looks beyond that to the blessing that is given to all of the families, all of the nations of the earth. And that seed of promise becomes the promise of the Messiah, the promise of the one who would come to rescue humanity from its brokenness and to shine light into darkness and bring the victory of God through the giving of his Son. So that promise to Abraham is restated to Isaac and to Jacob. And then it comes again in another fashion to King David. And David, it's said that upon the throne of David, the seed will rule and reign forever and ever. And that becomes the faithfulness of God and the promise that he's given to put and place his son, his victorious son, to rule and reign for all eternity. So, church, when we come to communion, we're celebrating that entire narrative arc. We're celebrating our point in time, our moment, the moment that we get pushed out onto the stage and live our life, our momentary life, the days that we get. And those of us who've been called by the faithfulness and grace of God, we get our moment in time to put Jesus on display and to declare to the world the wonder of his saving grace poured out over time. And so this week, we're going to talk about God's faithfulness and share some stories. And so I've asked a few people to do that for our in-person service. And then as I did, I realized, oh, wait a minute, I really can't do that in our video. I don't have time, or I don't have the technical facility to go out and do interviews in the next couple of days. So here, if you have a story, or if you have a way in which you want to communicate where you've seen God's faithfulness over this last year, would you write me an email? And I'll share that in our video on Sunday. So either way, Sunday's going to be a little different. And this might give some of you who are terrified of speaking in public an opportunity to speak to your church family. So have you seen God be faithful? Have you witnessed the faithfulness of God in these challenging days? Have you noticed that God has been true to his promise? The promise that he made way back there to Abraham is the promise that he makes to you. He is faithful, and he is a gracious and good God. So prepare your heart for Sunday, church. We're going to have communion together. And we'll see you then. Love you and miss you. God bless. See you on Sunday.